Hi everyone. We are so glad that you could join us today at Penn Speaks. We wanted to start with just a little bit of an introduction. So my name is Sarah Besnop. I'm one of the two teachers of public communications at Fels.
And my name is Carl Magiri, and I'm the other instructor for communication, and I teach the work at school.
We are so excited to welcome you today. This is an event that has been going on for I think about 5 years now, but the tradition of our inspirational speeches dates back about 15 years to the start of this course with someone named Buck Benedict, who is a friend and for me a mentor, and he started this tradition of ending our public communications classes each semester with an inspirational speech. And about 5 years ago we thought, why are we keeping these amazing speeches locked away in the classroom only for those 15 students to see? And we started this tradition of Penn Speaks. So getting to share the best of the best from our students and getting to share their message, their stories, and their truth with everyone at the Penn campus and beyond. So it is just such a joy to get to see so many people who are not students in our class sitting here today getting ready to experience the magic of that final class each year. And this year we're really excited because we have students from both our full-time and our executive program. That means we have speeches that date back as long as being first given 2 years ago, up until some people who just gave them last semester. And we're just so excited for you to get to see this experience, these years of speeches that have all come together. So I'm going to invite Carl to kind of share with you a little bit more what the inspiration for inspiration speeches is, how we encourage students and what we tell them to share. And then we're going to get started with the program as you see on your list. So.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, inspiration, of course, sounds like a pretty broad topic, and kind of an intimidating when you open up your syllabus and say, I have to inspire people. That's what it says here. So how do you do that? And the way we did it, and the way you did it, was to kind of reach back inside to those seminal experiences, those moments where the light bulb went off, where some sort of understanding of the meaning of things kind of came together for you. And you realized that that was not just something that was important to you, but it had a universal aspect. And so that's what we're trying to pull from these speeches. And that's the joy of teaching this, because our students start to work on these even really in the very beginnings of the course. It's not just something you see at the very end, but it's a building process. So you'll see the polish tonight, but the truth is that these speeches have been formulating and growing and developing and being added to and made more rich over those weeks until the students gave the speeches in the last class, and then of course tonight, which is just a wonderful event. So we're very excited, very much looking forward to your work. This is really your night, and we're very, very happy that there's a good forum for this.
Absolutely. So tonight we'll get to hear 6 students. 3 are from one of Carl's classes, 3 are from my class. So before each speech, we'll do just a brief introduction so you can meet our speech giver. But we'll be going right through, so we can't wait to then greet you at the end after we've all been fully inspired. And please join us for refreshments down here. But we're going to start with one of Carl's wonderful students.
Great. Okay. Ami Patel. I don't want to give anything away. Ami's story is just what we were talking about finding those moments in your life and early on, and then how they come together into a talk. So Ami, we'll hear you. The mic is important, right? Should we?
She said it.
Not use.
Do you think I need it?
No.
Okay. And then to...
Do your PowerPoint, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, good, you're on. Thanks.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Ami and I'm going to share my inspirational speech that I did last semester in Carl's class. Imagine yourself as a young girl in a much earlier time period. The year is 1933 and you're halfway across the world in a small Indian village. Just like all of your female peers, your hair is neatly set in 2 black braids, oiled and tied off with a bow. You are so excited to attend school, as you are one of the lucky ones. This story is about a girl named Shanta. For the first few months that she was in school, she was ecstatic to learn the English alphabet and how to write from 1 to 100. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to stay in school for very long, as her uncle spoke to her father, and the two males decided there really wasn't much value in her getting an education. After all, she was a girl. Shanta was my very first roommate. We slept in the same bed for the first 10 or so years of my life. I never called her Shanta, of course, because I would have definitely been punished. I called her Ba, which means grandmother, because she's my grandma. My Ba never failed to tell me her story, often to the point of absolute exhaustion. If you have grandparents that you're close to, I'm sure you can recall the same 4 or 5 stories that they tell you every single time you see them. For us, this was a nightly ritual. She often told me that her dreams were to learn how to read and write English, but that she just never learned. Before I even started kindergarten, she taught me everything she knew, the English alphabet and 1 to 100. And the idea behind this was that she would prepare me, I would be ahead of the curve, and so when I'd learn new things in school, I could come home and then teach her. This way she could get an education along with me. My close relationship with my Ba taught me 2 key life lessons. 1, how transformative an education can be, and 2, the value of service, or seva, as she called it. At my young age, my seva was mainly for her. My Ba was extremely disciplinary. After dinner, every single night from the age of about 8 years old or so, I would have to wipe the table and sweep the floor while my sister did all of the dishes. Additionally, I did other odd tasks, such as standing on top of her shoulders. At a young age, my hands were small. I didn't really have a lot of strength, so like a massage with my hands probably wouldn't have much effect. So there we are. And really nobody ever questioned the safety of this. My dad took the picture, so he was clearly happy with this. The most bizarre task, hands down, though, was addressing my Ba's dry and scratchy back. My Ba would unwrap her sari, and I would grab the tools: a blue fine-tooth comb and a bottle of Jergens lotion. First, apply the lotion throughout her back, and second, comb away. After every shoulder standing period or back combing session, my Ba would go at length to thank me or my sister for our service to her. To be quite honest, I very reluctantly took on these tasks. Often I would pretend not to hear her. I would try putting it off 5 or 10 minutes, or at best, I would hope she would pass the task along to my sister. However, once I started doing it, it really was mindless. I didn't mind at all. And at the end, she would give us blessings, which was great. Today, my Ba is 92 years old. This is 91, because it's a little bit older, but you can pretend. She is definitely the most loved person that I know. Just a few months ago, I went to visit her in North Philadelphia, and in the midst of conversation, she turned to me and my sister, and she said, "You know, you never ended up teaching me how to read English, and I'm probably going to die soon." Her health is good, but she's really great with guilt trips. But she's right, I didn't. As you may be able to imagine, a child teaching her grandmother how to read and write English can be a little bit problematic. Going back to that first grade experience, I don't know for sure, but I bet that the two of us looked pretty similar entering school. The difference is I entered school in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, where I was the only one with brown skin, apart from my sister, and definitely the only one with 2 long oiled braids. It was not always easy to look different, feel alone, and struggle with a constant cultural gap. As early as elementary school, I remember experiences like reaching into a communal box for crayons or something and just noticing every single time how different my skin color was from everyone else's. it didn't help that when we were asked to do activities such as drawing pictures of ourselves, all the other students would pick up beige or yellow. And as a child not wanting to be different, I dreaded these types of activities. At times, I'm pretty sure that I drew myself as beige or yellow. Female, minority, low income, and first generation is not really the profile that most people tend to think of as privileged. However, because of the contrast between my reality and my grandmother's, I felt privileged because I had opportunities that she did not. In fact, at one point, our household had 15 people in it. As if our neighbors did not think we were odd enough, we literally multiplied overnight when all of my dad's siblings and their children moved from India to America in search of opportunity. It is that odd combination of adversity and privilege that compel me into public service today. Overcoming my personal struggles while recognizing that there's so many other people that don't have opportunities open to me is one of my greatest advantages. I feel like I'm always searching for some way to address the inequality that my ba faced and help others, whether it be through access to education, workforce development, or the environment. I truly, truly believe that each person has some sort of privilege that they can use and they can share to impact another individual. I really don't expect everyone to have an experience like the one I described above or earlier, but I do think that each one of us has a crucial role to play in this part of history, and that one of the best forms of engagement is through public service. Whether you volunteer as a Philly reading coach to help students read on grade level, or volunteer with Broad Street Ministry to help feed the less fortunate, we all have the opportunity and duty to be engaged. If you're someone that is already engaged, my ask for you is to spread your passion and nudge others to get involved as well. My grandmother is not literate, but she can write her initials, SVP. When I was younger and I'd have to have a paper for school signed, I would leave it on the kitchen table, and my parents would come home after, well past my bedtime, and they would sign it. The next morning, I would take it to school. In some cases, they would forget or they just might not see it. In those situations, I would ask my ba to sign. And I remember seeing the pride on her face as she very slowly wrote SVP on my papers. It is a small win, but it is still a win. Change or impact doesn't have to happen in large, noticeable ways. It's the small things that add up to large-scale change. If all of us were to choose to volunteer or engage, whether just a small portion of our time, we have the potential to help society move forward, whether by an inch or a mile. Volunteering is an amazing way to give back while personally gaining. You gain perspective, unforgettable experiences, meaningful connections, and community. I have people in my life that have said, you know, volunteering is nice. Raising awareness, that's nice too, but doing little things here and there doesn't really make a dent. Look at all the problems that we have in the world. To that, my response is, doing nothing is really just not an option. As a child, I didn't really think much of these English lessons, shoulder massages, or back combing moments. These were tasks that I did because I had to. However, decades later, my ba will still rave about how helpful it was that my sister and I did these acts of service for her. I now realize that she made me understand the importance of giving back, as well as the satisfaction of helping somebody else. I've come to see how meaningful service really can be. The following quote from hopefully our future president, Michelle Obama, closes out my speech and communicates this sentiment the best. You may not always have a comfortable life, and you will not always be able to solve all of the world's problems at once. But don't ever underestimate the importance you can have, because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. When we think about these inspiration speeches, we sometimes think about the original definition of to inspire, right? It means to breathe life into. And so that's so much of what we're going to get to see today, to really see people through the eyes of the speaker. And it was so wonderful to get to learn about your boss. And thank you so much for sharing her with us today and breathing her into this room for all of us to enjoy. Now I'm very excited to turn it over to Helen Robb. Helen has very kindly and wonderfully been the TA for my class for the past year. I am very devastated to see her go. She has done a really wonderful job, totally unprompted, giving just incredible feedback. And I have now gotten to see her help inspire 30 students in my class to give their own inspiration speeches. And there's no one else I'd rather give this platform to inspire us herself than Helen. So if we can all give Helen a big round of applause.
I love Sarah's double clap because you get a clap before you do anything.
We always do.
I'm going to deliver my speech that I wrote for this time last year for Buck Benedict's kind of final class of inspiration speeches. If you walked into my family home in early July 2014, you would have been hit by the smell of cake, of freshly cut grass, and of sunflowers. If you'd rung the doorbell, while we would have happily let you in, we wouldn't have heard it over the Wimbledon commentary, the raucous laughter, and the pops of champagne corks. It was my mum's happy final week with us. Before I go any further, I should let you know, as part of Penn's academic integrity guidelines, that this speech was actually posthumously co-written. My mother left me a stock of papers, texts, and diaries that have fed every one of my creative endeavors in my entire life. But she also gave me an incredibly kind gift. She gave me a journal that answered questions that I never would have thought to ask. When the journal asked how she wanted to be remembered, she said, "I definitely want the word beloved in there. A beloved mum, wife, and daughter, and to a lesser extent, a great occupational therapist." And when asked what her dreams were for her life, she said, "Living my life in a good and honorable way." My mother did live her life in a good and honorable way. And I don't want to simmer her down to a single lesson, takeaway, soundbite, but since we have precious little time together and so much inspiration yet to feel, I wanted to use her beautiful knack for aphorism to share some of her greatest advice that she gave me. I thought that that was all I was going to do. But in writing this, and especially in rereading it, I realized that it's not really about the advice. Her final lesson for me is that it's about the sharing, it's about the smiling together, and it's about the remembering. It's what makes the difference, and that's why I really appreciate you guys doing this active service for me and listening to me tell her story. I want to talk to you about what could have been her darkest hours, but weren't. And I don't really want to talk only about the cancer. I know you might have your own experiences and that it might be triggering. If you don't want to listen to it, please, I won't be offended. But it's my truth and it's her truth, and as she used to say, if we have to live through this, you might as well get some good stories out of it. When I was growing up, my mother would always tell me, it's great to aim for the whole world, but if you lost your key because you didn't tidy your room, you can't leave the house. Or as I like to think about it, it's all about foundations. It's about having all the right things in place to get started. My mum's heart was always special. She met my dad when they were 15. He'd been advised to join a typing class as a way to meet girls, and it worked. He sat next to this beautiful blonde girl and spent the I hope not. And spent the next 6 weeks annoying her. He made jokes, he gallantly let her help him with the exercises, and he claimed to live close by so that he could walk her home, despite being a mile's walk in the other direction. Neither of them ever learned to type faster than 20 words a minute, but they fell madly in love. My dad was always keen to stay for dinner, to talk about fishing with my grandfather, to watch soap operas, and to just stay around. Watching him laugh with her family, she realized that he actually lacked what she had. He didn't have the people with the time, resources, and will to help him become the man that he could be. My mother saw in this boy that she loved, a kind and exciting person who needed a foundation. He needed a home. She was really special, and she shared hers with him. She was first diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 8. She was 35, and they'd already been married for 15 years. She brought my sister and me into her bedroom to tell us that she was going away for a couple of days, and not to worry. We helped her fold her new pajamas, because the doctors simply couldn't see her old ones. We didn't understand, but she promised us that Dad would get pizza, so we thought it was probably all going to be okay. She spoke to us with such grace, and she later explained it to me, the motto that she stuck by in those times: always act like you're wearing an invisible crown, even if it gives you crown hair. She had one relapse, and she saw the millennium in from a hospital bed, but she recovered. So much so that actually, unless she was in a bathing suit and showing off her scars, she really didn't talk about it. We kind of forgot about the whole thing. When I first went to university, my mum helped me move into my room. It was up 5 flights of stairs in a college house in Oxford. For a group of people who'd never seen people go to university before me and my sister, that was a huge deal. Not quite huge enough not to complain about the stairs, but pretty big, like really important. Years later, in the journal, my mum would list it as one of her happiest days. But she woke up the next day with a sore side. It's just from lifting the boxes, not to worry. It didn't go away. She spent months in increasing pain, losing weight, and being told by so many doctors, she's just menopausal. Stop worrying about it. Come back in a few months. Finally, after a year, we got her diagnosis: ovarian cancer, stage 4, 20% chance of making it 5 years, 0% chance of surviving. The day after we heard the news, I returned to my second year at Oxford. Term was starting that week. I was class president. It was my job to greet the new students and be the beaming light of joy that would guide them through the next 3 years. Despite my concern for my mum, she made me go and made me put on the bravest face I have ever worn. She said, "I don't want you to sit here watching me die. Go and do something I can gossip about at the hospital." So I tried. And I succeeded sometimes. And it was really hard, but watching her from a distance was really beautiful. She had this unbelievable ability to find joy. She told me that you should always have a bottle of champagne to celebrate the mini victories. Sounds like something that Gatsby would say, but it's something that my parents lived by since long before they could just afford to add some verve to the shopping list that week. When my mum was in chemo, she lost her hair. They Skyped me to watch them shave the last of it off, giggling helplessly over bubbles and appreciating how lucky she'd always been to have a really pretty head and great bone structure. And she shared her joy. She reached out to other people living with ovarian cancer through forums, support groups, and charities. She talked to them about their experiences. She found donors for charities that help women find joy despite cancer. And she did countless interviews telling women not to give up and to keep going back to the doctor. She forgave hers. She forgave her doctors. And together we watched countless hours of daytime TV and sat for days in chemo wards, teaching other patients how to crochet and playing parlor games with the old ladies. They really enjoyed 2 truths and a lie. It was June 2014 when she fell really sick. Came out of nowhere. One day we were planning her visit down to London for the Matisse exhibition, and the next I received the call. The scary call. The 2 a.m. get home right now call. And when I walked into the grey, loud, overfilled wardroom the next day, she just smiled and apologized for the inconvenience. And we'd all started to accept what might be true. My dad had put the kettle on for himself, so we knew that something was really wrong. The next day when I visited, she'd been moved to a private room. We went in and we heard all the options. She could come home as she'd always wanted to, and she'd have probably 2 days. Or she could stay in the hospital and maybe make it 3 weeks of terrible hospital tea. It was a Friday. She took a deep breath. Thinking it all through, taking it all in. I was hysterical and she was graceful and calm. And she decided in just a moment to stay in the hospital until Monday, and then she'd come home. Then she'd be ready. She spent the next 2 days in hospital working with the efficiency that our Wharton friends would be proud of. She planned her whole funeral. She met with friends and family. She met with and forgave her estranged brother. She finished my journal with a shaky hand. And she spent time with us all separately, recording videos of messages that she thought would make us feel like she was close by. In mine, she thanks me for being there, for going to chemo and not being too much of a fuss, for the quiet time. She tells me to surround myself with people who think I'm precious. She looks straight to the camera and says that she was proud to be my mum. And she tells me to accept that my dad will remarry sooner than I think is okay and to somebody entirely inappropriate, which just goes to show that she really knew more than worldly wisdom could have told us. And knowing that I would still need more, she wrote me a letter for whenever I was ready. On the Sunday, the day before she came home, the day that she likely would have left us had she come home when she'd wanted, it was my 22nd birthday. We threw a party in her room, and frankly, it was grim. The walls were grey, everything smelled like antiseptic, and the nurses were way too tired. But they let us drink that emergency champagne against all medical advice. And they took photos of us with tear-stained eyes and bright pink lipstick. Eventually, on Monday, she came home. The house was filled with flowers and tea and chocolate and joy. And we laughed like we couldn't even believe we were allowed to. We threw open every window of the house and let the world in. We listened to Billy Joel and Elvis Costello and the Dixie Chicks, and we were truly happy. In the quiet moments, my mum spent time online. She was sending people little messages to let them know that she was thinking of them. She said, if you're thinking of somebody, let them know. And those people felt so special. My mum died on the 7th of July, 2014 at 7:43 p.m. It was a warm twilight, and there were starlings and bats flying over the garden. It was her favorite type of night. It was the day before her 50th birthday, which I think she would have liked because she really didn't want it to be said that she died in her 50s. In the journal, when it asks if there's anything that she regrets, she says she wished she'd been to the Grand Canyon. She wished that she'd seen New England in the fall. She wanted to have made it to her and Dad's 30th wedding anniversary a month later. But apart from that, she thinks it was a life well lived. She said, don't compare the director's cut of other people's lives to the outtakes of your own. They're all beautiful. I believe that my mum handled her own death with the grace and kindness and compassion, seeking every possible moment to find joy and inspire it in others. It was such a beautiful way to die that I want to tell the world about it and share it with those facing it themselves. But as she reminded me, terminally ill people have enough to worry about without you waffling on about your late mother. So I'll just have to leave her advice and kindness with you and hope that one day, God forbid, it might help. And I wanted to end my speech there with her. But then I reread her last letter, her advice, her last lecture. She said a bunch of soppy things that would only sound like self-aggrandizement if I told you them, but then she got real. She said, remember that people are kind and they always want to help, so let them in. Because she knew that for a while I wouldn't, and for a while I didn't. I ran away when she left us. I remembered how excited she'd been when I was first posted abroad, and I really took that idea and ran with it. I moved to Denmark and Cape Town and San Francisco, and then eventually, somehow I managed to find myself here, in this room, with people I trust and people I've just met and people I'm so happy to see again, telling her story. I'm trying really hard now to let people in, to open up, to let people make me feel at home. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this tonight and to share her wisdom. The value of giving advice, sharing your words and the words of your mentors, isn't in the words themselves, it's in the sharing. It's in the smiling and it's in the remembering. Thanks.
Ellen, thank you so much. So I guess inspiration is always about change, about how we change ourselves, but we also are that light that changes other people, and that's why these stories are so important. And it's so important to be told well, to be told widely. And I'm going to introduce now Matt Forrest, who is going to talk to us about the wonder of things, and that small piece of wisdom about not letting the world take that away from you and making sure that we continue to focus on that too. I remember when Matt gave this speech in our last class, and a mix of humor and also really poignant insights, and I'm really happy that he's here to share those with you tonight. So welcome, Matt.
Right. I've never heard Helen's speech before, so I'm like processing that in real time and doing this. So it's a fun mix of emotions I'm going through. Like I said, my name's Matt Forrest. I took Fels Public Communication class in the fall, and I'm excited to share with you what I wrote. I hope you find it at least mildly enjoyable. I titled my talk Rediscovering Imagination. I'm going to open with a quote by one of my favorite authors. "I'm very frustrated by fear of imagination. I don't think that's healthy." J.K. Rowling. "A dinosaur," he said confidently after she asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. Now, maybe at 3 years old, he just didn't have the vocabulary to respond, "archaeologist." But I'm fairly confident that in his mind, at that moment, at that age, he thought it was completely possible that he could achieve his goal of being a dinosaur. You can be anything. He added another brick to the top of the structure. At 7, maybe 8, he didn't exactly yet know where he was going today. Maybe he'd spend the afternoon exploring ancient ruins, traveling to the edges of the galaxy, or on a Jurassic safari. There was really no limit. As long as he put the bricks together in the right way, he could go anywhere. You can create anything. The words jumped off the page as if it was happening in the room. At 12, he'd read it so many times he almost had it memorized. "Ah, go boil your heads, both of you," said Hagrid. "Harry, you're a wizard." There was a silence inside the hut. Only the sea and the whistling wind could be heard. "I'm a what?" gasped Harry. "A wizard, of course." He loved this part. It seemed so real. It's not that he knew he'd go to Hogwarts one day. He was too old at that point and too American. But to think there could be an entire world out there filled with magic and wonder, and we were just waiting for it to reveal itself. Anything is possible. Remember what that felt like? When there were few limits to where your minds could take you? When there was nothing holding us back, and our imagination was our greatest tool? With it, we could be, create, or imagine anything. It allowed me to believe, even for a moment, that I could be a dinosaur, that I could go on any adventure with just a few bricks, and that somewhere in this world, magic was real. I know it's a different moment for each of us when we're signaled that that's no longer practical, to rely on our imagination and see it as a tool with unlimited value, when we have to stop playing around. I was only allowed to believe I could be a dinosaur for about a second before being told, that's silly, you can't grow up to be that. I bet I shed a few tears over that. As I got older, I became more guarded in sharing that my favorite way to unleash my creativity was to see what I could construct with a few piles of Legos to avoid seeming childish. And by the time I was a teenager, only a select few were allowed to know how many times I had reread the writings of J.K. Rowling, not yet fully recognized for the masterpiece they truly are. Over time, signals from my peers, and more damaging from adults I admired, reinforced that I should be practical, stop wasting my time on silly things, be realistic in my goals, and get focused on something worthwhile. I stopped letting myself dwell too long on thoughts or plans that seemed too fantastical. I played it safe, and I stopped viewing the world as a trustworthy place for ideas that did not fit into what was seen as normal. The world to me was a place where magic was no longer possible. Over time, this became my default state. As imagination became discouraged, I stopped considering what if and relied on what is. I lied about my hobbies, my favorite books, where I wanted to be when I grew up, or even who I was. I came up with answers that seemed practical to avoid a patronizing response or jump through hoops to defend my choices. As I went on to college, I meekly spoke about the fact that I decided to study geography, of all things, because that doesn't exactly scream practicality, and I'm sure the color drained from my parents' face today I announced that was my new major. I withdrew my Peace Corps application and didn't pursue opportunities that seemed too absurd for me to have a chance at. Ultimately, I found myself constantly rationalizing to others that my 2 years of national service following college was a normal decision based on bland things like skill building and financial benefits to repay my loans. I suppressed my more aspirational reasons for choosing that path. Everything had to be practical. I forgot what it felt like to believe that you could be anything, create anything, or that anything was possible. About 10 years after first reading the words of J.K. Rowling, I found myself completing 2 years of service with AmeriCorps at a social service center on the north side of Chicago. That's where I first met Shannon. Shannon was in her mid-60s, unemployed, housing insecure, and had encountered what she called a slight detour in life. However, what stood out most about Shannon is her commitment to not being limited by the world around her. She often shared with me how she saw time as a social construct, and she chose to travel through the day free from the burden of things like clocks, to not limit what she could do in a day. And while I'm not advocating for this approach, as it often resulted in her being several hours early or late to an appointment, nothing better captured Shannon's "anything's possible if you let it be" approach to the world. When I met Shannon, she knew she was meant to be a Peace Corps volunteer teaching art in Ghana by the time she was 70. She was sure of it, with nothing to go on other than the fact, as she put it, she had already imagined herself there, feet firmly on the ground. Shannon came in constantly during my 2 years in Chicago, sometimes just to reschedule an appointment she was very late for, but mostly to work towards accomplishing what she knew was certain to be accomplished, because she had imagined it, she could do it. No matter what the setback, how long a form was delayed, or what social worker had laughed at her aspirations, she was certain in what she could achieve and always told us as much. When I left that role and moved to Philadelphia, Shannon still hadn't hit submit on her Peace Corps application, but she knew she would one day. And I'm happy to report that's exactly what she did, a Peace Corps volunteer teaching art in Ghana. Imagination is the uniquely human capacity to envision that which is not, and therefore the fountain of all invention and innovation. Not my words, also J.K. Rowling's. As I reflected on working alongside Shannon and countless others in Chicago, I began to identify something I had forgotten over the past decade: the importance of boldly trusting in our imaginations as a powerful tool to guide us in bringing about change. Shannon gave herself permission to imagine herself in the Peace Corps, no matter how challenging or unrealistic the journey to get there may have seemed. She believed she could be anything, create anything, and that anything was possible. And she was right, as I was about my decision to do 2 years of service, though maybe for different reasons. As I moved away from that experience in Chicago, I found myself thinking about what I learned from Shannon a lot, and why that one relation stood out so prominently to me from the others. I soon came across an idea that behavioral psychologists refer to as growth mindset, the understanding that our abilities are not fixed, which allows us to lean more readily into challenges. This started to bring it all together for me, and brought to light what Shannon understood that so many around me had shied away from. She allowed herself to consider what her mind had never seen before, to imagine a world of magic, if you will, and then work towards creating it. This understanding awakened a new commitment in me. Unlike the teacher who shut down my desire to be a dinosaur, I committed to asking questions of myself and others, inviting the mind to imagine how we could achieve our wildest dreams or solve enormous problems, and then working step by step to figure out how we would make it happen. I was lucky to come to understand more fully through one relationship how much we need our imaginations and need to support others in using theirs. As I look, as we all look, towards what comes next in our lives, I believe we need our imaginations more than ever. The challenges facing our world can seem insurmountable without them. So I urge us not to limit ourselves to the realms of what is considered possible, or to only explore what the mind has already seen. Otherwise, we may never allow ourselves to solve that which seems unsolvable. And while I don't have the exact answer for how to do so, I know that when your mind starts to go somewhere that may seem unrealistic or impractical, you should challenge yourself to let it go there and see what happens. And then find a way to remind yourself every day this is okay, that these thoughts that may seem unpractical on the surface have real value towards transforming the world if we learn to trust in our imagination. Near the end of the 7th Harry Potter book, spoiler alert for all of you who are still reading, Harry asked Professor Dumbledore, who has been dead for a year, if this whole conversation they had just had was happening in his head. Dumbledore responds, "Of course it's happening in your head, Harry. That doesn't mean it's not real." I think about this a lot, and to remind myself, I keep 3 items on my desk: a Tyrannosaurus Rex figurine, a pile of Legos waiting to be transformed, and a golden snitch. I can be anything, create anything, and anything is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, we have just 3 speeches to go, and I think you've all gotten to see already what a diverse approach to the question how to inspire really brings out in students. And we're going to have 3 interesting speeches to go. So I'm going to invite Aurora Kuhn to come on down. And as she comes on down, I love the double Aurora was in my class, almost 2 years ago at this point, and I'm thrilled for her that she'll be graduating this spring, which is really exciting. She's participating in the executive program. Aurora has won an award in my mind that I keep secret from my students, which is I've started to allow people to bring guests to the final inspiration speech, and I secretly tally who has brought the most guests, just for my own amusement. And Aurora, 2 years running, is still the all-time winner, having brought the most guests, which I think is a particularly appropriate way to introduce this speech, which is about place and community. And obviously, Aurora, winner of this contest, has proven to be quite a wonderful creator of community. And I'm excited for you to hear her speech about community. And since it's now going to be a triple clap, as I
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so grateful for my community coming here and to everyone else that is now a part of my community. I'm more than a little obsessed with Vermont. The fact that I grew up there is usually one of the first things people find out upon meeting me. I love to talk about Vermont to anybody, friends, colleagues, students. In fact, the director of the organization I used to work at calls me Vermont because I talk about my home state so much. Vermont is known nationally for its ice cream, moonlight, and Senator Bernie Sanders. But in fact, I found in my travels outside of my state that despite our claims to fame, many people don't even know Vermont exists. A couple of times when I've said I'm from Vermont, people have replied, "What state is that in?" Once, I know, right? Once I was asked whether people spoke English there, which I'm pretty sure meant that the middle schooler asking the question thought that Vermont was its own country. The student was actually on to something. Vermont was, in fact, its own country for 14 years before joining the Union. It's no wonder I talk about Vermont so much. As the state with the second smallest population, there aren't that many people to evangelize Vermont. It's sort of my civic duty. And Vermont is objectively pretty special. For one, it is literally the land of milk and honey. Vermont has over 1,000 dairy farms producing around $500 million worth of milk every year. Vermont also has the highest number of cheesemakers per capita of any state. There are 45 of them, turning that fresh dairy into award-winning cheese. I even brought my Cabot bag to advertise that. And over 400 beekeepers make their own honey in Vermont. The deliciousness does not stop at milk and honey, however. Vermont is the nation's biggest producer of maple syrup, making more than 3 million gallons per year, 40% of the nation's total crop. Making maple syrup is called sugaring. Many of my neighbors have sugar houses that make their own maple syrup every spring, and I have fond memories of sugar on snow, maple syrup boiled extra until it turns into a soft caramel and then cooled on and eaten off of the fresh March snow. Sugaring is so important to Vermonters that I actually learned a song about it in elementary school. I'll spare you from hearing it though. So, Vermont is the place to go for top-notch dairy products and natural sweeteners. But is there anything else to this sparsely populated state besides delicious food? Of course. Even better than the food is the quality of life. Vermont is the safest state in the nation with very low rates of crime. Growing up, we never locked our house or our car. People say that the only time people lock their cars in Vermont is during zucchini season because that's when gardeners will deposit their extra overgrown zucchinis in your backseat while you're at the bank. It's true. In college, I refused to lock the door to my dorm room because I was convinced that not locking doors was a part of my culture. This resulted in some understandable tension with my roommate. Once, our floor mate invaded our room to play video games with his 4 friends because we had a better configuration of Ethernets and outlets than he did in his room. After that, I decided I maybe could lock my door while still maintaining my culture as a Vermonter. Speaking of culture, Vermont really does have its own unique culture beyond leaving things unlocked. I have a little bit of a Vermont accent, but some Vermonters are proud to have a thick accent, doing really weird things with their vowels and R's. For example, my father says father instead of father, and Vermont instead of Vermont. He also says culture instead of culture. It's not just the accent, there are sayings unique to Vermont too. One, "you can't get there from here," refers to the fact that due to the state's rural nature, there are some places you really can't get to from here because there just isn't a road between them. In addition to having a certain way of speaking, Vermonters also tend to have a specific character. Vermonters are generous, but not always friendly. The kind of people who would always stop to help pull a stranger's car out of a ditch, but might not strike up a conversation with a new person in the neighborhood for years. Vermonters are casual. Jeans, a t-shirt, and clogs pass as professional attire across most industries. And Vermonters are notoriously independent. We like to do things on our own and don't care what people think. Clearly, I could talk about Vermont's wonderful food, quality of life, and culture all day long. I'm on my way. I did warn you at the start that I have an obsession. But in fact, I'm not here this evening to evangelize Vermont, although I did exploit the opportunity in the first half of my speech. I actually want to tell you about what I discovered upon leaving my home state. After living within 30 minutes of my parents' house for my entire life, I left Vermont 4 years ago to come to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a place that in many ways couldn't be more different from Vermont. The city of The city of Philadelphia contains 2.5 times more people than the entire state of Vermont. Philadelphia is about 20 degrees hotter than Vermont at all times. Since moving here, I sweat a lot more and rarely use my winter jacket. Vermont's landscape is characterized by barns and rolling green hills, and Philadelphia's landscape is characterized by row homes and concrete. I was hesitant to move to Philadelphia. My partner's job was moving here, and we had been discussing moving to a city anyways, but I really didn't want to leave Vermont. When we arrived in Philly, I cried every night for the first few months. I was mourning the loss of everything I love about Vermont, but there were two things I missed above all else. These two things actually had nothing to do with Vermont's specialty foods, the quality of life, or culture. What kept me up at night was missing nature and my family. Vermont's natural beauty is the reason that between 5 and 13 million people visit my state as tourists every year. The expansive forests, rolling hills, and thousands of farms create stunning vistas in every season. There's so much greenery and tons of wildlife. Turkeys, deer, salamanders, songbirds, and butterflies are a daily sight. As a child, I spent most of my time climbing trees, walking up and down streams, and observing animals and flowers. I'm still most happy while walking outside and making frequent stops to look at plants. The other thing I love most about Vermont is my family. My dad, sister, and mom are some of the most loving people you'll ever meet. I have so many positive memories with them, almost all of which took place in Vermont. I cherish every second I get to spend with them, so it's hard to be so far away. Sometimes it feels like you can't get there from here. It's a 7 to 9 hour drive or bus ride from Philly to Vermont, depending on traffic. If you fly, it's expensive and still takes at least 5 hours because the closest airport is 2 hours from my parents' house. When I first moved to Philly, it felt lonely and desolate. But over the past 4 years, I realized that I could find the things that are most important to me about Vermont, even in this strange new city. Although Philly's landscape is totally different from Vermont's, there is actually tons of natural beauty to be found here. Every day on my way to work, I admire the gorgeous speckled bark of the Japanese maple trees on Baltimore Ave. There are flowers all over Philadelphia, growing in gardens and parks and wild up fences. And I actually see surprising amounts of wildlife in Philadelphia. There are always deer in the Woodland Cemetery. I see cardinals more often here than I did in Vermont. I also see red-tailed hawks and peregrine falcons all the time in Philly. I once even saw a peregrine falcon roosting in the SEPTA station at 30th and Market. And a couple of weeks ago, I saw a beautiful bald eagle soaring above the playground at Comedies Elementary. While I still miss my family every day, I call them more now than I did when I lived nearby. I think leaving Vermont has in fact made me closer to my family and helps me to appreciate time with them even more than I already did. Also, coming to Philly has given me a new and different community of friends. In Vermont, there are not very many young people, and the young people there are all following a similar path. Most are starting families. Here in Philly, I have met a much more diverse group of friends who are doing all sorts of different things in their life and have a greater variety of interests and experiences than my friends in Vermont did. This has greatly enriched my life, giving me more to think about, talk about, and do. Vermont will always hold a big part of my heart, but after 4 years in Philly, I love it here almost as much. More importantly, I realize that I can bring the things I love most about Vermont anywhere I go. I will always be able to seek out and find natural beauty and to maintain strong relationships with my family. And in every new place I live, I will have the opportunity to find new communities and cultures that will change and enrich my view of the world.
Thanks, Aurora. Wonderful, wonderful. It's almost like reading the New Yorker magazine. Wonderful laughing and traveling and all these visuals. We really are wired for story, aren't we? There's just something extraordinary about that ability to see everyone looking at the same thing, but to see so much richness in it and difference from our own perspectives. So thank you for that. Next on our list is Molly Williamson, and Molly is intense. We talked about style of speaking and approaches to speaking, and Molly has always brought kind of a unique intensity to the speeches that we've enjoyed in our course. But at the heart of this intensity is a much more serious purpose, and that purpose is to kind of wake us up, make us see something. Shake us a little bit. And I think that's another role of the speaker too, is to put a spotlight on things, but not just look over here, but more look over here, right? Put that forceful look into things. And I think that's a wonderful experience that we can all learn from too. Molly is also a graduation speaker, and I really
I would like to open by saying that this is the second version of my speech because I did take Carl's very gentle and sage suggestion that maybe I should leave out some of the swears. So just so you know, just pepper them in with your imagination.
And you promised, Molly.
You know, who knows? Once you get up in the razzle dazzle, you know how these things go. My friends keep dying. I wrote that line back in September when I started working on this speech. I had just lost 2 friends back to back in the span of a week. Like bereavement bookends. They were the 4th and 5th this year, respectively. I rewrote that first line a dozen different ways, trying to soften it, make it more palatable. It felt tacky to open like that. I was doing it for shock value. It's shocking, though, to lose someone. And it keeps happening to my friends, steady as a pulse, this thing that just steals the breath out of an entire community. I felt like I needed to talk about it, like somehow that would help me push back against these waves that just wouldn't stop crashing down on top of me. I started to freak out a little bit as the weeks went on, trying to figure out how I was going to fit everything that I know and don't know about loss into a nice 10-minute talk for class. And why did I think that was going to be inspirational? I realized as I turned it over and over that I don't want to talk about loss. Our losses are our own. I mean, really, could any of us talk about someone that we've lost in a way that would make the people in this room truly understand the weight of that? Maybe. I can't. So, I can't talk about loss. But I can talk about grief. I made some notes about my own grief as I was moving through it, trying to find pieces that I could understand and pieces that I could share. I wrote about how I could not stop thinking about the hole in my life. I wrote about how grief repeating starts to feel less and less sharp each time and more like this mudslide that just settles in and suffocates you. I wrote about how hard it is to grieve from far away, about how you feel like you're looking in on a shared loss from outside a window and you feel like a traitor for not being there. So you just curl up into yourself because no one here knows that person, and saying the words, "I miss my friend," just sounds so damn small. Mostly though, I wrote about how helpless I felt in the face of something that I couldn't make a joke about. I'm funny, I am. If you don't know right now, you can ask somebody about it afterwards, I'll let you know. In my family it goes like this: smart, kind, funny. And really, like, a lot of the time, smart and kind are optional. My mom likes to say that she knew that my dad was the love of her life on their first date because he drank a bunch of wine and fell asleep in his chair in the middle of it. My dad likes to say that he knew that my mom was the love of his life on their second date because they went peach picking in an orchard. She got a bee up her dress, lifted the whole thing over her head, and went running through the trees. Usually after people meet my family, they quietly take me aside and say, like, "You make a lot more sense now." So, I grew up knowing that being funny was important. Not just because it makes you wildly charming and very intense, but also because it's a really powerful way to gain control of situations that feel out of control. Bomb to test? Make a meme about it. I'm sure some of you can remember hashtag Ask Me How Stats is going. Have a dab of mental illness? Well, I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere. Have you had your heart broken yet again? Oh, honey, you're about to be a one-woman show. So, in short, being funny is the way that I make the world a more manageable place to live in. But grief won't let itself be managed. Back in the fall, someone asked me if I thought that there was a difference between sadness and grief, whether they were two different shades of the same emotion or separate entities entirely. The distinction I draw is this: sadness can be gripping, and it can be brutal. But you can recognize the shape of it. You can understand it. Grief, it wounds you in your animal self. It drives you to your knees. How do you laugh through something like that? Here's the first thing that I learned about grief. You don't have to. It's in this place, laid bare, where you will find the people who will hold you. They will hold you when you can't laugh. They'll hold you when you can't make them laugh. They will hold you when all you can do is cry until the bones in your face ache. We need to recognize these people because they're the ones who'll pick you up and help you walk again. Not back to your old self, because she's gone now, but towards steadier ground at least. They'll carry you to a place where you can write the first tacky line, because even though you're not there and you're not feeling it, you have the hope that in 8 months, you're gonna have something to say about this in a speech about inspiration. The second thing that I learned is that, yeah, it is important that we learn to see these people, but it's more important that we learn to be these people. We need to recognize suffering in one another, even when it whispers. We need to push past our fear of saying the wrong thing or saying nothing. We need to fight the urge to fix. Easier said than done, I know, I'm one of them. Lives aren't always changed or saved in grand sweeping gestures, but sometimes in the held breath of a moment where we allow ourselves to sit still and to let them stay broken and to quietly say, I'm still here. Finally, I would like to share this story about me and my friend Dwayne. The day that my friend Dwayne died, I was at my therapist's office and I was inconsolable. He had been a really good friend of mine. We'd been in a band together, we traveled together, he practically lived at my house. He was a fixture in my life. And I didn't know how to find the words to say the breadth and the depth of who he was and who he was to me, to this person that didn't know him. So, when she asked me very gently and therapeutically, why don't you tell me about your friend Dwayne? Obviously, the first thing that I did was shout, he drove me crazy and he slept with all of my friends! He did. So, that there is really the long and the short of the final thing that I learned about grief. As shocking as grief is, equally as shocking sometimes is growth. Reach in, if for no other reason than by reaching in, you might just be helping someone break open their own grief and find some space to finally figure out a way to make a little joke. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. There's always this idea, right, of what makes someone a charismatic public speaker, and one of the theories is that you really just need to bring to the speech all of your energy, your targeted focus, and the charisma, right? That target, that focus, that knowing that we have to be in the room to experience it. And I think we just got to really see that. So I want to now get to bring down Christopher Bristow. Chris was in my class this past fall, and he always sat in the very front row, which I was very grateful for. It would be very hard to get people to sit in the very front row. And I bring that up just to say that what we're about to hear is the story of how Chris came to be in the very front row. And this is one of my favorite inspiration speeches in my class. I joke, but it's one of the best graduation speeches I've ever heard. So we'll get to close out our commencement right now with this final speech. So, Christopher.
Before I get started, I would just like to thank Sarah and Helen. I mean, they got things out of me that I never knew were there, and I don't think you can ask anything more from your teachers, so I appreciate it. Good evening, teachers, students, families, and friends. I'd like to start this speech with a story of conquest. One man's 40-plus year journey to finally finish something that seems like it was destined to happen, but for many reasons, took a long time to complete. That man is me, and that conquest was completion of my bachelor's degree. Not just any bachelor's degree, but a degree from the University of Pennsylvania. The story starts in early 1975. I'm 17, and my mother is in the hospital fighting one of her many battles with colitis. My father takes me to visit her. In her weakened state, she finds the strength to still be a mom and inquires whether I've completed my college application to Penn. Since this is a story about me taking a long time to complete something, well, you already know the answer to her question. So out of a sense of guilt from disappointing my sick mother, who just so happened to work at Penn, I half-assed completed my application, barely making the deadline, of course, because, you know, at the time, that's my style. When I received Penn's decision letter, I was not surprised that I didn't get in, but was surprised to find myself on the wait list. Pretty ironic as things turned out. Well, I wasn't waiting on Penn, so I went to Temple, where I really wanted to go, because my brothers had gone there. Not the best reason to choose a school, and it lasted barely a semester before dropping out. Fast forward to spring 1983, and I'm working in a butcher shop, having now dropped out of 3 colleges. My mother is still working at Penn, wasn't too thrilled about my prospects in the butcher business, so she started pointing me to jobs at Penn. I was lucky enough to land a low level, like really low level, like lowest paid person in the school level, financial job at Penn's engineering school. So I'm working at Penn in the mid-'80s, and at the time, Wharton had an undergraduate evening division. I exercised my Penn employee tuition benefit and enroll in Wharton evening. Well, if you've been paying attention this far, you already know how the Wharton evening story ends. Unfinished, of course. Fast forward to 2012. Still working at Penn Engineering, and they nominate me for leadership at Penn, a development program for rising administrative leaders to develop the skills to fill senior leadership roles. It's a great program and an honor to be selected, and although I felt I was among equals in my cohort, it became quite clear to me that I was missing something everyone else in the cohort seemed to have: academic credentials. Unlike the Scarecrow, the Wizard of Oz was not around to confer on me a diploma. So I had to earn one the hard way. And in that moment, I decided to try again and enrolled at Penn's College of Liberal and Professional Studies undergraduate degree program, majoring in the social sciences with concentrations in sociology, psychology, and urban studies. Not a bad combination if you're an old white guy and you want to become woke. The word woke isn't dead yet. Pretty sure me using it to describe me just killed it. So for the next 5 years, I persevered through 2 evening classes every spring, summer, and fall, late night bus rides home, walking into classrooms for the first time and everybody thinking, he must be the teacher. Dos años de español. Deadline after deadline after deadline after deadline, and finally, in the summer of 2017, I attained my Penn bachelor's degree, and then because, you know, I had finally found my groove, I immediately enrolled in the Fels Executive Master's in Public Administration program, from which I will graduate this summer with my 2nd degree from Penn. So if you're in your 20s or 30s, and you find some inspiration from my story to finish something you've started, that's fantastic. But this speech isn't about how I can inspire you. It's about how you inspire me. You see, I believe that the difference in my ability to finally become a successful student is having all you youngins as my classmates. I remember way back when I was your age, having older folks put down the music we listened to, the books we read, the clothes we wore, etc., etc. I vowed that when I got older, I wasn't going to do the same to the generations younger than mine, to never become that stereotypical, get off of my lawn, old man. So I try to stay abreast of popular culture, to get to know you better, to figure out what makes you tick, how you like to work, what drives you, and what you hold in importance. As proof of my desire to stay current, there was a neat little Freaky Friday moment this past Thanksgiving when I, the old baby boomer, was able to familiarize my young millennial daughters to the Grammy Award-winning pop singer, Dua Lipa. If you're not familiar with her, check her out on the Google. She's real, and she's spectacular, and she don't give a F. And if you're from Philly, you gotta love that. Philly is also the place where the word grit, and a little to my chagrin, the Flyers mascot Gritty, are all the rage. If you're not familiar with the theory of grit, the concept is that those who possess grit, defined as a combination of passion and perseverance, achieve success in life. I think I'm living proof of the theory, because when it came to my education, I seemed to lack grit, and only developed it in the recent past, and I believe I get it from you. I admire your passion, your perseverance, and I want to stay in the game with you. But more importantly, I want you to stay in the game. I've been bothered recently by the attitude from some in your generation that the last few years have been terrible and the world is headed for doom. Well, back in early 1969, when I was 11, the local paper published an almanac of the big news events from 1968. I remember paging through it in my parents' living room and how it dawned on me at such a young age what a terrible, awful year 1968 was. Martin and Bobby both gone down. Vietnam War escalates. Russia invades Czechoslovakia. Riots in Detroit, Watts, Philadelphia. The Democratic Convention in Chicago turns into a street fight. Nixon, like the president? Pretty bad year, huh? But you know what the most amazing thing about 1968 is? Probably wasn't half as bad as 1941. 1941 probably wasn't half as bad as 1915. 1915 wasn't probably half as bad as 1861. 1861 probably wasn't half as bad as well, you get the picture. So whether you believe it or not, the world is getting better. Poverty and crime are down. Literacy and health are up. We have record low numbers of worldwide casualties from war, and more people live in free democratic societies than ever before. Yes, there is much work to be done, but I'm confident that your generation will continue to drive improvements in all aspects of life. You're better people than my generation. You're more accepting of each other's differences, you show more concern for each other and the planet we live on, and you connect with each other in ways that I will never fully understand. So keep fighting the good fight, keep inspiring each other and old guys like me to do better, and if our paths should ever cross again, well, feel free to play on my lawn. Thank you.
All right.
I guess thank you is the word that comes to mind. Thank you to our speakers for the wonderful work that you've done to get from an idea to these artistic, these wonderfully creative, inspirational speeches that mean so much to us, that have captivated us. I always watch the speaker, but then I look around the room and I watch the audience, because then you can see the expressions of the faces and you know the connection. And that's the richness of this. This is why it's so important to talk about speech. What's the other tool that we have to change the world? It's a language, and that's what we do. So, Uria, thank you so much for putting all this together. This is just great. And
yeah, so a final thank you to Uria and Vince from Fels who set this all up for us. We're so grateful. So thank you to and with that, please join us for refreshments, and congratulations to all the speakers.